Welcome back to another Pairs Well knitting tutorial. In today's tutorial, we're going to be showing you how to do double knitting, which is fabric that is created using knit and slip stitches, but creates a very finished, polished, double-sided fabric. Right here, I'm showing you how to identify on the plug and play slipover where we're going to be attaching or using an anchoring stitch to attach our double knitting. This video you can watch to see just how we do double knitting and of course for the slipover in particular, anchoring it to a vertical edge. So I've just showed where the slip stitches are, but we are using the anchoring stitch beside it, which is just a regular knit stitch. So I'm picking up those slip stitches just to show you where the folded edge is of the seam, or I should say the edge. And now I'm just showing you with the needle where those knit stitches are, those little V's that have been created just from regular stockinette knitting. I've counted up as many stitches as called for in the pattern to anchor my double knitting tab, because we're going to be creating a tab here that's attaching onto the existing fabric. So on my swatch, I've just inserted my needle, and I didn't need to do an open stitch marker because I've just used my needle to show where I need to start picking up those stitches. I insert my needle through the V or that knit stitch all the way through, and with my working yarn, I wrap it around my needle and pull it through. I've got my tail that's hanging out on the other side at the very beginning where I picked up my first stitch, and I just continue to pick up my stitches, one stitch, of course, for every knit stitch or every V. I find this super satisfying to pull through, and I actually really enjoy picking up stitches, as bizarre as it might sound. So I'm just continuing to work slowly, but allowing myself to really have the tension that I want, to allow myself to have a fabric that's going to be close to my double knitting tab. I don't want loose stitches here because otherwise I'm going to have a loose attachment or loose anchor. So I want it to be pretty tight and close to the fabric. I'm pulling that last stitch through because I marked it with an open stitch marker, but you can eyeball it as well. Just showing you that we've got the slip stitch on the side, and now we're going to be ready to work our double knitting. We're just going to slow down now the video so you can see what's happening in a little bit of a slower time. We're bringing our working yarn to the back, and I'm just counting up to make sure I have the appropriate amount of stitches. I have to be an even amount when working flat double knitting. I wrap my yarn to give my first stitch a knit stitch. I'm pulling it off onto my right needle. Now what I'm doing with my working yarn is I'm bringing it to the front as if to purl, and I just slip my stitch. My third stitch, I'm knitting regularly, pulling the working yarn in front and just slipping that stitch onto the right hand needle. That's all double knitting is one knit stitch and one slip stitch with the yarn in front. Every time I slip that stitch, I'm slipping it as if to purl. So I continue on with that sequence of knit one and slip one stitch as if to purl with yarn in front. I'm working my double knitting flat, so I'm flipping my work around, and I'm going to be doing the exact same sequence on this side of the fabric. So showing you in slow motion again here, making sure and just showing you those purl bumps from our knitting. We're going to be knitting the first stitch. That was a stitch that we had slipped on the last side of our work. I'm going to be bringing the tail, or should I say the working yarn, in front, slipping it over to the right needle. We're knitting that next stitch regularly. I'm bringing my working yarn forward, slipping as if to purl and knitting. Again, following that exact same sequence, we've done even amount of stitches, which allows us to do the exact same thing on the front and the back of the work to create double fabric through our double knitting. I'm flipping the work again as we're working flat and just getting things sorted out here. I find for double knitting, I wrap my yarn to give it a little more tension and control. Normally, I don't wrap my yarn to tension it, but I do find for double knitting, because I'm going back and forth with that working yarn behind the needle and in front of the needle, it helps give me that control as I'm kind of flicking my wrist back and forth between where the working yarn should go. So just showing you again on the same side here, we're working every other stitch knit and every other slip stitch as if to purl, and with that yarn in the front. And because this is double knitting, it actually takes double the time to create the same amount of, I'll say, rows or length of fabric, because you are slipping every other stitch. So it immediately, I think I can say, shortens your fabric. So we're doing extra work for less fabric, if that makes sense, because we are knitting both. We're knitting two pieces of fabric essentially that are melted together. I'm just showing you on this one last side here, knitting every other row and slipping every other row with yarn in front. We're getting out of the slow motion now, and I'm just worked up a few more rows to show you what that double knitting tab or double knitting fabric looks like. So we've got beautiful, squishy, double-sided fabric that's being created from stockinette two-sided fabric from knitting and slipping every other stitch, and we are good to go. I've got another video that's going to be showing how to bind off on this. Check that out. That is our double knitting.